everybody, this is our first video for physical science, and let's go ahead and dive into it. It's for chapter 1, and it's an introduction to science. The first thing we're going to talk about is the nature of science. When you have a question about how something works, how do you find the answer? And this is what this video in the next couple of days in class is going to help us discover. One reason we all take science, even if you don't like science, is to help develop critical thinking skills. Being able to solve a problem, being able to find out how something works without knowing at the beginning. Those type of things is what taking science helps develop for you as a student. Now, how does science take place? A scientist performs experiments for one of three reasons. Either to find a new aspect of the natural world that we don't know about, to explain a known phenomenon, and a phenomenon is something that happens in the world, but we don't know why it happens, so they'll do experiments to try to explain why it happens. And the third reason is to test predictions of current theories. Scientific theories are not proven yet. They just have a lot of experimental backing. And so scientists will continually perform experiments to try to prove or disprove current science theories. Now, scientists answer questions that they have by investigating. So that's one part of critical thinking that we really want to develop when you're in physical science, your investigation skills, figuring out why something's happening or how something's happening. Scientists plan experiments. Scientists make observations with their eyes, nose, ears. They also confirm results. Okay? They are always, at the end of an experiment, going to come up with a conclusion. Now, let's talk about the branches of science. We just finished talking about what scientists do, but now let's talk about the branches of science. There are two main branches. You have the natural science and you have social science. Social science is human behavior. That is not something that we will talk about in this class because that's social science. We are a part of the natural science branch. And along with us is the biology and the earth science. Biological science is what you'll take in 10th grade. Physical science is what you're in right now. Earth science, you can have a choice to take it 11th and 12th grade if you would like to. Now, a part of biological science, these are just a couple of examples that I thought you would already be familiar with, but there are more examples than this. Botany, plants, zoology, animals, ecology, and like I said earlier, there are other examples. Physical science is broken into two branches. You have the physics part and the chemistry part. So what physical science does is it gives you a small introduction to chemistry to get you prepared for a chemistry class your 11th grade year if you choose to take it. It also gives you an introduction to physics, which is going to prepare you to take a physics class if you choose to your 11th and 12th grade year. Now, if you're saying to yourself, well, I don't want to take chemistry or physics my 11th and 12th grade year, it's okay, because physics and chemistry, you're going to find out this semester help you in your everyday life. And so you're going to learn key things that help you and that you're going to start seeing things in your everyday life that chemistry and physics affects. Now, earth science is the third branch of science we mentioned, and it includes things like geology, which is the study of rocks, rock formation, things of that nature, meteorology, which is the study of weather, astronomy, the study of the planets, the stars, and as we said earlier, there are other examples of earth science. One of the most important things I want you to remember about the branches of science is that they all work together. You cannot have chemistry without biology. You can't have meteorology without physics. Okay, all of them work together, and you need all of them to work. Now, science and technology is also two items that work together, and we're going to talk a little bit about what technology is. Now, what you see right here on your screen is called a Frater model. A Frater model is something we're going to use throughout this class. It's a way to help you critically think and also start thinking more deeply about a concept or a word. And so we will use these several times, and you'll actually see 3 of them today. Now, technology, the definition of technology is the application of science for practical purposes. So it's how you take science and apply it to your everyday life that helps make something you do a little bit easier. So some characteristics of technology are new knowledge, application. They make things faster for us. They make things easier for us. Now, some examples of technology: computers, remote controls, a pen computer, and what I mean by that is they're started making pens that actually have computers in them, and so that's something new that's come out. I know you won't think about this, but at one point your pen and pencil was technology because it was something they had not always had. Now, some non-examples: air, rain, trees, grass. Things that are of nature that are not human-made are going to be things that are non-examples of technology. Technology are going to be things that are human-made, and like computers, cell phones, remote controls, TVs, pens, pencils, all of those. Now, let's go ahead and continue to talk about the nature of science in talking about scientific laws and theories. I've already touched on this just a bit, but you need to be able to compare and contrast what scientific law and scientific theory is. Now, theories explain why something happens. Laws describe how something works. So let me tell you an example. One example of a scientific law is the law of gravity. If I hold a ball in my hand above the ground and I let go of the ball drops to the floor. We all know that. That's the law of gravity. It cannot be disproven. It is a scientific law. It's been proven. And the law of gravity describes how something works. Okay, it describes how gravity works. Now, a theory would be, an example would be the Big Bang Theory, which can be controversial. Some people believe the Big Bang Theory is true and proven. Some people do not believe it's true and do not believe it's proven. So that is a scientific theory that explains why something happened. The Big Bang Theory supposedly explains how we came into being and how the Earth came to be. Now, the Big Bang Theory is a theory. It has not been proven yet. That means it is not scientific law, so you don't need to believe just what a teacher up at the front tells you. You need to do research on your own to determine, do you think the Big Bang Theory is true or do you not think it's true? And like I said, this is why you take science, to develop those critical thinking skills. Now, something else about scientific laws and theories are that experimental results support both laws and theories. Even though a theory hasn't been proven yet, there are scientists doing experiments, so there are some experimental results. Theories and laws are always being tested by scientists. Okay, they're always being tested. Now, for this part, I want you to pause the video and quickly write a 2-sentence summary in your summary section of your notes about the first page and a half of the notes that you've taken. A 1 to 2 page sentence summary. Once you finish that, turn the video back on. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the way science works. Okay, let's talk about the way science works. First of all, let's talk about science skills. Identifying problems, planning experiments, recording observations, correctly reporting data are some of the most important science skills. You will start to develop some of these science skills in physical science this semester. And again, the reason why we develop these science skills is because it helps us to learn how to critically think. And critical thinking helps you solve problems logically. Now, scientists use the scientific method to solve problems. Scientists use the scientific method to solve problems. This is something that should not be new to you. This should be a review. And so let's quickly look at the scientific method. The first thing a scientist does is observe, makes observations, and writes them down. From those observations, it forms a question in the scientist's mind, or those observations create a question for the scientist. And they want to know the answer to that question, so they begin to research and collect data. And then after they've researched and collected data, they form a hypothesis. And a hypothesis is an educated guess of what they think will happen if they do an experiment. Now, once they've formed a hypothesis, they must test the hypothesis, which is the experimental stage. Make sure you know that test the hypothesis and experiment are the same thing. When you're experimenting, you are testing a hypothesis. Then after they test the hypothesis, they observe once again and make observations, and then they're able to draw conclusions. And this, in the drawing conclusion section, is when they reject their hypothesis, saying it was not correct, or they accept their hypothesis, saying that it was correct. Now, when scientists test hypothesis, when they're doing the experiment, there are two parts. Well, there are several parts to an experiment, I apologize, but there are two parts that we're going to talk about next. And this is the independent variable and the dependent variable. The independent variable is the variable it's being tested. You know this variable at the very beginning of the experiment because it's what you're testing. Also, the independent variable is always an object. It's tangible. Okay, it's an object that you're testing. Now, dependent variable is the outcome of the experiment. So the dependent variable cannot be known at the beginning of the experiment like the independent can. The dependent variable can only be known at the end of the experiment. It's the outcome. It's a measurement. It's never an object. One of the things you need to jot down in your notes that I don't have a blank for is that the independent variable is going to be an object, something that you can touch or something that is tangible. The dependent variable is going to be a measurement or a result. It's not going to be an object. And that will help you differentiate those two. Now let's do, and then scientists experiment so that they can test ideas. And the hypothesis is an idea. It's an idea that the scientist has, and they experiment in order to test those ideas. Now I want to give you some practice. So let's look at this. We're going to have a plant experiment, and what we want to know is we've got two plants, and we want to know if using fertilizer will help the plants grow. We want to know, we see commercials all the time telling us buy this fertilizer, but does it really work? We don't know. We're just taking them at their word. So we've decided to test to see if fertilizer actually works. So we're going to have two plants. Now, what would your question be? I want you to pause the tape, and you can either, if you don't want to write it in your notes because you're not sure, use a scratch sheet of paper and jot down what you think really quickly, and pause the tape and then start it again once you're ready. A question that you should have come up with, and it doesn't have to be exactly the same as mine, but something similar, does fertilizer make a plant grow faster? Okay, you might have said, does fertilizer work? But usually this is what we want to do. We want to say, does the fertilizer, and we want something specific. Does the fertilizer make a plant grow faster? Does the fertilizer make a plant grow taller? Does fertilizer make a plant grow more leaves or more blooms? Think about that. You want something specific that you can really test. Now, a constant are things that stay the same. So if we have two plants, we're going to have one with fertilizer, one without fertilizer. That's how we test to see if it actually works. And so in those two plants, there are some things that we want to keep the same because the only thing we're testing, there's only one thing we're testing, and hopefully you know what that is. So some of the constants are type of pot. We want to make sure we have them in the same pot because if one has a larger pot, it could grow faster just because it has a larger pot, not because it has the fertilizer. The type of plant it is, we want to make sure we have the same plant. We want to make sure we water them the same amount. They get the same amount of sunlight. They have the same type of soil, etc. And y'all may have even come up with some on your own that I don't have listed here. Now, the next thing I want you to think about is the independent variable. So pause the tape, write down what you think the independent variable is. The independent variable is the fertilizer. That's the one item we're testing, and we knew it at the beginning of the experiment, and it's the one thing that we're changing amongst the plants, right? Everything in the plants are going to be the exact same except one has fertilizer, one does not. Now, what's the dependent variable? Go ahead and pause the video and write down what you think. The dependent variable is plant growth. It's how much the plant grows. Now, of course, since we said in our question, does the fertilizer make a plant grow faster, we're going to measure the plant growth and also the time it took to get to that plant height, right? So the dependent variable is what we measure, the amount the plant grows, how fast the plant grows, the time it takes, something of that nature. But it's a measurement, not an object. Now, the control group is a standard by which we test results. So it's always, the control group is always what stays the same in the experiment. So pause the tape and write what you think stays the same in the experiment. It's the plant without fertilizer. So it's, the control group is always the thing that's the most normal, that doesn't have the independent variable in it. Okay, the control group never has the independent variable in it. Now, let's dig into independent and dependent variable just a little bit deeper. We're going to do Frayer models on these two words. So let's look at what the definition of independent variable is. It's the variable that you change or test in an experiment. Now, some characteristics of the independent variable is this item you select. Okay, it's the one item being tested, and you actually get to select it. Now, an example of an independent variable is our fertilizer. I have on here color of uniforms. That's just another example of if we wanted, if the band needed new uniforms, and we wanted to figure out which color of uniforms would be the coolest for them to perform in, we could do a test on that, right? Have two different uniforms, two different color uniforms, measure the temperature inside the uniforms, like maybe halfway through the performance to see which ones got the hottest, and so that way we could determine which one would be the cooler option for the band, and it would be color of uniforms. Color is what we would be changing in that experiment. And some non-examples, the data you collect. The data you collect is not the independent variable. So like stating how much the plant grew or how tall the plant grew is not the independent variable because that's a measurement, it's not tangible. Now let's look at dependent variable. The definition of dependent variable is the result due to the item you are testing. It's the outcome, it's the result, it's what you measure at the end. Okay? Now the characteristics of a dependent variable is it's the outcome, it's the result, it's always determined at the end of the experiment. You cannot know the dependent variable at the beginning of the experiment. Now, a non-example of dependent variable, something that is not a dependent variable, is the fertilizer from our plant example, and similar items in the setup. Similar items in the setup are what? I hope you already know that they're constants. Something that is constant, it stays the same, it's the similar item throughout this experimental setup, and it can never be those can never be the dependent variables. All right, now we're finished with our video and our notes for today. You have a summary section right underneath dependent variable. This is what I would like you to do. I want you to pretend that you write for the local newspaper, and you need to come up with a newspaper headline that catches people's attention, but that it also reiterates what you've just learned since your last summary. So it would include science skills, scientific method, and the parts of an experiment. So come up with a newspaper heading that's catchy, and then right below it, just write me a quick explanation of why you chose that heading. I hope you have a great evening. We'll see you tomorrow in class.